In the vast sweep of sacred history, where prophecy intersects with human frailty and divine mercy reshapes destiny, the story of Hazrat Younus, as known in the Judeo-Christian tradition as Jonah, emerges not merely as an ancient narrative, but as a timeless, cinematic testament to hope, repentance, and the boundless reach of Allah's compassion, a story that unfolds across storm-lashed seas, collapsing civilizations, and the crushing darkness of the deep, echoing through the Quran as a reminder. For every soul trapped in despair, this is not simply the account of a prophet and a fish, but a profound exploration of faith under pressure, of divine justice tempered by mercy, and of a prayer whispered in absolute darkness that continues to reverberate through centuries, as described with striking intensity in Surah Yunus, Surah Al-Anbiya, Surah As-Safat, and Surah Al-Kalam, where Allah presents Hazrat Younus as both a messenger chosen and a man tested, sent to the ancient people of Nineveh, an influential city in the heart of Mesopotamia, powerful, prosperous, yet morally decaying, where arrogance, idolatry, and injustice had become normalized, and where Younus was commanded to deliver a warning that shook the foundations of their certainty, calling them away from false gods and toward the worship of the one true Allah, a mission that placed him at the center of resistance, mockery, and rejection. For history shows again and again that societies at their peak rarely recognize the urgency of moral reform, and the people of Nineveh were no exception, dismissing the prophet's words as superstition and refusing to abandon their inherited ways, until frustration mounted within the heart of Younus, as a frustration born not of arrogance but of exhaustion, of witnessing truth rejected and guidance ignored, and in a moment that defines the human side of prophecy, he departed from his people without explicit divine permission, believing the punishment he had warned them of was inevitable, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform not only his destiny but the spiritual legacy of repentance itself. The scene shifts dramatically from land to sea, from the dust of Nineveh to the rolling waves of a restless ocean, where Hazrat Younus boards a ship heavy with cargo and souls, seeking distance from a mission that felt complete. Yet the sea, as the Quran often reminds, is never beyond Allah's command, and the calm voyage soon descends into chaos. As violent winds rise and monstrous waves crash against the vessel, a storm of such ferocity that seasoned sailors recognize it as no ordinary natural event but a trial weighted with divine significance, and as the ship threatens to break apart, the crew resorts to casting lots to determine whose presence has drawn this calamity upon them, a practice known across ancient maritime cultures, and each time the lot is drawn, it points unerringly to Younus as the prophet among them, a man of God. Standing silent as fate closes in, until at last he acknowledges his role and, in a moment of profound surrender, allows himself to be cast into the raging sea, a sacrifice that instantly stills the storm, reminding humanity that obedience to Allah restores balance even when the cost is immense. Yet the trial is far from over, for as Younus sinks beneath the waves, swallowed by darkness upon darkness, Allah commands a great fish not as a beast of punishment, but as a vessel of preservation, to engulf him whole. And here the narrative enters its most iconic and symbolic phase, the image that has captured imaginations for millennia, a prophet alive within the belly of a creature, surrounded by the crushing pressure of the ocean depths, layered in threefold darkness: the darkness of the night, the darkness of the sea, and the darkness of the fish's interior, as described in Surah Al-Anbiya, where time loses meaning and hope seems extinguished. Yet it is precisely here, at the lowest point conceivable, that the greatest spiritual elevation occurs, because stripped of all illusions of control, Hazrat Younus turns entirely to Allah, recognizing his mistake not with excuses but with humility, and from within that living tomb he utters the dua that has become a cornerstone of Islamic spirituality: La ilaha illa anta, subhanaka, inni kuntu minas zalimin. There is no deity except you, glory be to you, indeed, I have been among the wrongdoers. A supplication that encapsulates tawhid, tasbih, and sincere repentance in a single breath, and Allah Himself bears witness to the power of this prayer, declaring in Surah As-Safat that had Younus not been among those who glorify Allah, he would have remained in the belly of the fish until the day of resurrection, a statement that elevates remembrance and repentance from ritual acts to forces that alter cosmic decree. As the dua echoes through the depths, divine mercy responds, and the fish, acting not as a captor but as an obedient servant of Allah, carries Younus to shore and releases him onto barren land, his body weakened, his skin burned and fragile, a man reborn through suffering, and Allah, in a tender display of care, causes a gourd plant to grow over him, providing shade and nourishment, a small yet profound sign that divine compassion extends to the smallest details of recovery after repentance. But the story does not end with survival, for the greater miracle unfolds when Younus returns to Nineveh, expecting destruction, only to find a transformed people, because in his absence, confronted by the signs of impending punishment, the inhabitants of the city collectively turn to Allah in genuine repentance, abandoning their idols, reforming their ways, and pleading for forgiveness. And in a rare and extraordinary moment recorded in Surah Younus, Allah lifts the punishment entirely, making the people of Younus the only nation in Quranic history whose collective repentance before calamity led to complete salvation, turning a prophecy of doom into a legacy of mercy. And this reversal sends a powerful message across time, that no society is beyond redemption, that divine wrath is never inevitable when sincere repentance intervenes, and that hope remains as long as the door of Tawbah is open. The global impact of this story transcends geography and era, influencing Islamic theology, moral philosophy, and spiritual psychology, shaping how believers understand trials, mistakes, and divine forgiveness, and serving as a recurring reference point in moments of personal and communal crisis. For scholars and storytellers alike have returned to the tale of Younus to illustrate that even prophets, though protected from major sins, experience moments of human limitation, and that Allah's response to honest repentance is not humiliation but elevation, a theme reinforced again in Surah Al-Qalam, where Allah reminds the Prophet Muhammad and by extension the entire Ummah not to be like the companion of the fish in impatience, highlighting the delicate balance between perseverance and reliance on divine timing. Viewed through a documentary lens, the story of Hazrat Younus unfolds like a carefully constructed narrative of rise, fall, and redemption, its pacing marked by sharp turning points: the rejection at Nineveh, the storm at sea, the casting of lots, the engulfment by the fish, the whispered prayer in darkness, and the unprecedented repentance of an entire nation, each moment layered with theological depth and cinematic intensity, each consequence flowing directly from choice and response, illustrating a cause and effect relationship governed not by blind fate but by moral law, where despair is met with remembrance and error is answered by mercy, and in this way the story functions simultaneously as history, parable, and living guidance, inviting every listener to see themselves within its arc, to recognize their own storms, their own depths, and their own moments of calling out from darkness. As the narration draws back and the echoes of the ocean fade, what remains is not the image of a fish or a prophet alone, but a universal Quranic reminder that no darkness is too deep for Allah's light, no mistake too great for His forgiveness, and no soul too lost to be found again, making the story of Hazrat Younus as not merely a chapter from Qisas ul-Anbiya, but a cinematic, eternal call to hope, patience, and unwavering faith. A reminder carved into sacred history that when all paths seem closed and every voice falls silent, a single sincere dua can still reach the throne of the most merciful. As the final echoes of this sacred chronicle fade into history, the story of Hazrat Younus stands not as a relic of the distant past but as a living, breathing Quranic mirror held up to every generation, a reminder that divine narratives are not preserved merely to be remembered, but to be entered, felt, and lived, for within this account lies a universal pattern written by Allah Himself, a pattern of human urgency clashing with divine wisdom, of impatience answered by discipline, and of despair transformed into salvation, where a prophet's momentary withdrawal becomes the stage for one of the greatest demonstrations of mercy ever recorded, and where the depths of the ocean become a pulpit from which the most powerful declaration of faith is uttered, reminding humanity that when all worldly structures collapse, when authority, certainty, and escape dissolve into darkness, the soul still retains its final and most potent weapon, sincere remembrance of Allah. The Quran does not present Hazrat Younus as a flawless figure beyond human reach, but as a chosen servant whose trial was preserved so that every believer drowning in guilt, regret, or helplessness might recognize that no distance geographical or spiritual can sever the connection between a servant and their Creator, that even within the belly of the unknown, Allah hears, responds, and restores, and that the dua born in darkness can illuminate generations, while the repentance of the people of Nineveh stands as a seismic historical anomaly, a civilization saved not by power, walls, or wealth, but by collective humility, proving that divine decree is not rigid destiny but a moral horizon shaped by human response. In Surah Yunus, Allah immortalizes this nation as a singular exception. In Surah Al-Anbiya He unveils the anatomy of despair and rescue. In Surah As-Safat He reveals how glorification alters fate itself, and in Surah Al-Kalam He cautions the final messenger and all who follow not to let urgency eclipse trust in divine timing, weaving the story of Younus as into the broader architecture of prophetic history as both warning and reassurance, a message that reverberates across continents and centuries, shaping Islamic spirituality, theological reflection, and the inner language of hope, until the lesson becomes unmistakably clear, that Allah's mercy is not the reward of perfection but the response to truthfulness, that salvation often begins only after surrender, and that when a believer calls out with a heart stripped bare acknowledging fault, affirming Tawhid, and glorifying the Most High, the oceans themselves must part, the darkness must retreat, and the decree must change, leaving us not with the image of a man and a fish, but with an eternal Quranic promise echoing through time that no night is endless, no repentance is unheard, and no servant is ever beyond the reach of Allah's light.